There is a moment in the quiet of a day, just before dusk wraps the sky in its velvet blue, when a thought returns to the mind like an echo long denied. It is not loud, it is not bold. It does not come rushing in like a storm. It seeps in gently, the way water curls beneath the door after a heavy rain. And when it comes, the avoidant soul feels it in their chest, a tightening, a trembling, a remembering. They sit with that thought there. They pretend not to. They busy their hands with the routine. Keys clinked in bowls, coffee stirred twice, mail shuffled, lights dimmed. But the thought remains, you remain, and the heart, though practiced in silence, dares to knock once more against the ribs that have housed too many unspoken words. For all the rehearsed detachment, for all the polished distance, there lives within the avoidant one a river of unsaid things. Before they reach for the phone, before a word is typed or a number dialed, there is a storm of questioning within them. Not of you, but of themselves. Did I deserve their kindness? Did I run too quickly from a touch that was warm, from eyes that saw me without trying to fix me? What if they've forgotten? What if their absence became peace and not punishment? These thoughts gather in their chest like clouds in late July, pregnant with the weight of what was left behind. The avoidant one is not without feeling. Do not mistake their pause for apathy. They feel deeply, so deeply in fact, that it has frightened them into cages of their own design. They learned long ago that love can be a sharp thing, disguised in satin, that to need is to risk, that to open the door is to invite the draft, so they became their own shelter. They told themselves that distance is safer than disappointment, that silence is less cruel than vulnerability unanswered. And yet, despite their fortress of solitude, there are nights when your laugh returns to them uninvited. There are songs they cannot hear without seeing the outline of your smile in the air. There are dreams where your name slips from their lips like a prayer they forgot they once believed in. And when morning comes, they shake it off, of course, they always do. But they carry that dream through the day like a secret flame in the hollow of their chests. They remember the way you listened, not just with your ears, but with your spirit. How you didn't flinch when they faltered, didn't run when their edges showed. They remember how you asked, how they really were, and waited, patiently, as if you understood that some answers must be excavated slowly, carefully, with hands that do not tremble. And that memory, oh that memory, comes to sit with them when the world is loud and everyone is asking for the version of them that smiles on cue. Before they reach out, they think of all the reasons they shouldn't. Pride for one, shame for another, fear, that ever-present companion, wraps its fingers around their intention and squeezes. What if you answer coldly? What if your warmth has been spent elsewhere? What if the bridge has burned completely and they arrive at nothing but smoke and cinders? But beneath the fear is a yearning. It is quiet, yes, but relentless, a wish for one more chance to meet you on common ground. With the walls down and the masks laid gently at your feet, they long to say what they couldn't before, that you mattered more than they let on, that they weren't ready then, not for something so true, so honest, so terrifyingly tender, that your presence shined a light on corners of their soul they had long ago abandoned. And light, as beautiful as it is, exposes the dust we've grown used to ignoring. They are not proud of the silence. They do not wear it as a badge. If anything, it burdens them, because the longer they stay away, the heavier the silence becomes, like wearing a coat in summer, unnecessary, suffocating. Still, they wait, not because they don't care, but because caring too loudly feels dangerous, because to reconnect is to admit that they walked away from something good, and not everyone is ready to face their own reflection in such clarity. They question if you'd even want to hear from them, if their reappearance would be a balm or a bruise. The truth is, avoidants do not return lightly. Every step toward reconnection is weighed, measured, overanalyzed in the caverns of their minds. They rehearse the message a dozen times. They delete it, read, repeat, delete again. They imagine your response. Then they imagine the opposite. They wrestle with every possibility before ever saying a word. And yet, despite the noise, the doubts, the what-ifs, they think of you, not as a possession, not as a trophy to reclaim, but as a sanctuary, a gentle place they once knew, a chapter they cannot erase, not because of regret, but because of reverence. You were different. You still are. There's a special kind of courage it takes to circle back, to admit fault without begging for absolution, to speak not just to be forgiven, but to be understood. And if the avoidant does return, know that it is not because they suddenly found clarity. It is because they fought through their fears and chose, for once, to trust the ache instead of flee from it. They think of the sound of your voice, not just its melody, but its meaning, how it made them feel seen without being judged, how it gave them room to be small on days when the world demanded they be giants. That kind of presence is rare. That kind of love, whether romantic or not, is not easily forgotten. And while they may not know how to say it without stumbling, it remains the compass in their chest. They remember the day they left. Perhaps they didn't say much. Maybe they vanished. Maybe they gave reasons that felt thin even to their own ears. But inside they were collapsing. Not because of you, but because connection felt like a fire they didn't know how to survive. They believed it would consume them. They believed falsely that independence meant escape, and so they chose solitude, mistaking it for strength. But even solitude, in time, becomes a prison when it is built on the bones of unresolved truth. And so they think, quietly, painfully, honestly, they think of your kindness, of your laughter, of your patience, of the way your presence made space in their life rather than crowding it. They wonder if you ever sensed their retreat wasn't about you, but about their own unfinished healing. They wonder if you still carry a part of them in your own quiet moments. Before reconnecting, they often sit with the weight of time. They ask themselves if enough has passed to make their words welcome. They worry about being too late. They worry about being too early. But mostly, they worry about being seen again, as they truly are. Fragile, imperfect, longing. And that to them is the most terrifying thing of all. They do not seek to reopen wounds. They do not wish to be forgiven without earning it. They only wish, perhaps, to be remembered not just for the way they left, but for the moments they stayed, for the times they tried, for the pieces of themselves they gave, even when giving felt like tearing open old scars. And if they reach out, if one day your phone lights up with their name, know that it took more courage than they thought they possessed. Know that they have replayed this moment 1,000 times. That their heart is a thunderstorm as they press send. That they are bracing for silence, for indifference, even for anger, but they still did it. Because something inside them chose hope over habit, connection over comfort. They do not expect a fairy tale. They do not expect a clean slate. But they hope with trembling breath that maybe, just maybe, you might still see the humanity in them, the growth, the trying, the wanting, and perhaps, if the stars are merciful, you might open the door just enough for a conversation to begin again, because the truth is, avoidants don't come back to reclaim the past. They come back because something in the present whispers that healing might be possible, that understanding might be mutual, and that the future, however uncertain, might still hold a place for both your names. They have battled with themselves longer than you'll ever know. They have questioned their worth, their capacity, their sincerity, and while they may not arrive with grand declarations or poetic apologies, their return, however subtle, is an act of quiet bravery. It is the soul battered but breathing, daring to believe that connection is not always a cage, that love, when it is true, does not demand perfection, only presence. And so they stand, phone in hand, heart in throat. They take the breath they've been holding for what feels like a lifetime, and they press send, not because it's easy, but because for the first time in a long time, they believe it's worth it. Even after the message is sent, the avoidant soul does not exhale fully. There is no relief in the act itself, only in the uncertain aftermath that may or may not come. They sit in the quiet that follows, a quiet so thick it nearly hums. Every sound feels louder now, the ticking of a clock, the rustle of fabric, the breath that stumbles in their chest. They check the phone once, twice, too many times, knowing the answer won't come just yet, and perhaps not at all. Still, they wait. But waiting is not passive. It is a storm beneath calm waters. Their mind churns with memories and imagined futures, tangled like vines growing wild in every direction. They try to occupy themselves with the ordinary, folding clothes, watering plants, organizing drawers they hadn't touched in months, but each task is colored by that ache, the ache of vulnerability, the ache of not knowing. It is an ache they have run from for most of their life, and now they are sitting in it, letting it bloom in their chests like a bittersweet flower. And yet, amidst the discomfort, there is a strange sense of peace. Not joy, not comfort, but peace. because for once they did not run. They chose honesty over avoidance, and even if it leads to silence, there is a kind of dignity in the truth. They remember the first time you made them laugh from the belly, that kind of laughter that disarms and unravels defenses they didn't know they still carried. They remember the way you listened, not just when they spoke, but in the spaces in between. That is what made you different. You didn't rush to fill the silence. You let it settle. You let them be. And that was terrifying, because it meant they had to sit with themselves. You didn't rescue them from their discomfort, and that, strangely, is what made your presence feel like safety. So many of their past relationships were built on performance, on being what others needed them to be. They wore personas like armor, but with you they were almost themselves. Almost. And it scared them more than rejection ever could. To be seen in that rawness and still be wanted, it felt like a trick, like a game they were destined to lose. So they left before they could be left. They withdrew before they could be exposed. They convinced themselves it was for the best, that they were protecting you from the chaos they feared they were. But now they are no longer certain. Perhaps the only thing they protected was the part of themselves that didn't want to feel fragile. And now they sit with that realization. They cradle it like something both sacred and sorrowful. Growth doesn't always look like forward motion. Sometimes it looks like standing still long enough to hear your own heartbeat. Sometimes it looks like admitting you were wrong, not in action alone, but in belief. They were wrong to think they were unworthy of being loved patiently. They were wrong to think distance would dull the connection. They were wrong to believe that vulnerability was weakness. And in this moment of humility, they understand that true strength comes not from indifference, but from care that endures, even in absence. They think about all the things they wish they'd said, not grand declarations or cinematic apologies, just the simple human truths. I missed you. I thought about you more than I said. I didn't know how to let you in without falling apart. These truths sit in their throat like stones, too heavy to carry, but too sacred to discard. And if given the chance, they would offer them gently, like gifts they never had the courage to wrap before. Not to win you back, not to rewrite the past, but to honor the impact you had on them, the imprint you left. They wonder about your life now, where you go when the world feels too heavy, who you lean on, what makes you laugh. They wonder if there's still a place for them in the smallest corner of your thoughts. They don't expect a grand welcome. They don't expect open arms, but maybe, just maybe, they hope for open eyes. Eyes that see the effort behind the message, the risk behind the words, the longing behind the silence. They replay your last conversation, not the words necessarily, but the energy between them, the unsaid things, the pauses that lingered too long. They remember the way your voice softened, as if trying to hold space, even when they were pushing away. And now they see it not as weakness, but as grace. You gave them the gift of space and stayed soft in the process. That kind of grace lives in the hearts of the rare and the brave. They've tried to forget, not out of malice, but out of survival. They tried to tell themselves it was nothing, just another chapter, just another lesson. But some people are not meant to be lessons. Some people are mirrors. And you reflected back to them the parts they needed to heal, the wounds they'd hidden even from themselves. And now, in the quiet aftermath of time past and past diverged, they realize you were never the problem. You were the invitation to grow, to feel, to trust. They just weren't ready to accept it then. They no longer seek a fairy tale. They no longer fantasize about picking up where things left off. They've lived enough life now to know that time changes people. And that's not always a tragedy. Sometimes it's the space in which we finally become the people we were too scared to be before. And they want you to see them now, not as someone perfect or healed, but as someone honest, someone trying, someone who is no longer ruled by fear. Their growth has been quiet. It did not come with fireworks or social media quotes. It came in late-night journals and early morning realizations. It came in therapy rooms and lonely walks and difficult conversations with themselves. It came in admitting their patterns, in choosing to sit with discomfort rather than flee it. It came in learning to stay. And now, reaching out to you is not about validation. It's about alignment. It's about reconnecting, not from desperation, but from wholeness. Still, they know the past cannot be undone. They do not seek to erase it. They seek only to honor what was good and to heal what was hurt. They seek to look you in the eye and say without trembling that you mattered, that you still matter, that even if life took you both in different directions, the road was better because it had your footsteps on it, however briefly. They are prepared for whatever your answer might be, even silence, because this time their intention is clean. It is not about getting something. It is about giving something, the truth at last. And even if you never speak again, they will carry the peace that comes from saying what needed to be said. That is the difference now. Their actions are no longer fueled by avoidance, but by clarity. And if by some miracle you respond, not with fury or confusion, but with openness, they will receive it with reverence, not entitlement, not expectation, but reverence, because they know now that reconnection is not a right. It is a grace, a gift, a possibility born from mutual readiness. And if that possibility exists, even in the smallest degree, they are willing to move slowly, to rebuild not what was, but something grounded in truth, something not rushed or wrapped in illusion, something real. They no longer fear being seen. They no longer fear needing someone, because they've learned that we all need each other, that independence is not the absence of connection, but the strength to show up without losing yourself in the process. And they are ready now, not just to show up for you, but for themselves. If you've moved on, they will respect it. If you've healed in ways that make a reunion impossible, they will understand. But they hope, in the quiet corners of your soul, you remember the light you brought into their life. And they hope you know it never went unnoticed. Even in their silence, even in their absence, they carried that light. And it changed them. They think of how many people move through this world pretending not to care because it's safer that way. How many people leave before love can root simply because the soil feels too tender. But they don't want to be one of them anymore. They want to grow roots. They want to water what matters. They want to stop running. And if that path leads back to you in any form, a conversation, a closure, a new beginning, they will walk it with humility and grace. And if it doesn't, they will still walk forward, grateful for what your presence awakened in them. Because some people don't just teach you how to love. They teach you how to return to yourself, to your truth, to the parts of you that were once too afraid to be seen. So if you are reading their words, now or someday, know this: you were never forgotten. You were always there, in the spaces where meaning lives. And whether your story continues together or apart, the chapter with you in it was one of the most important ones, not because of how it ended, but because of how it began, with honesty, with connection, with something real. And now they offer you not just an apology or a hope, but a truth. They cared then. They care now. And this time they're ready to show it, no matter how long it takes, because connection, when it's true, deserves that kind of devotion. In the days that follow, the message, a kind of awakening, unfolds within them. Not sudden like the breaking of dawn, but slow, like light spilling gently across a sleeping room. With each hour that passes, the silence, whether returned or unanswered, becomes less of an enemy and more of a companion, something to sit with, something to learn from. They do not fill the space with distractions this time. They do not run to old habits, to temporary comforts, to busyness that numbs. Instead, they let the stillness stretch, and within it they begin to listen. Not to the world, not even to you, but to themselves. They ask the questions they once avoided. Why did I leave when it felt right? Why does closeness feel like danger? Why do I build distance into everything that starts to feel sacred? The answers don't come quickly. Some don't come at all. But asking is a start. Asking is an act of faith. They begin to trace their patterns back, not to blame, not to shame, but to understand. They remember how, as a child, love sometimes meant performance and vulnerability meant exposure, and exposure led to pain. They remember how early rejections taught them to armor up, to stay self-contained, to rely on no one but themselves. They realize now how much they've missed, not just in you, but in life. The moments they turned away from joy because it felt too good to trust. The people they pushed away when closeness felt like a trap. The opportunities for connection they passed up because silence was more familiar than intimacy. This understanding is not comfortable. It is a mirror with no filter. It shows them everything, the cracks and the courage, the fear and the fire. Still, they do not retreat. They stay with it. They learn to forgive themselves in pieces, not all at once, but slowly with compassion. They stop calling themselves broken. They stop defining their worth by how well they kept people at bay. They begin to redefine strength, not as stoicism, but as the ability to say, I was scared. I didn't know how, but I'm trying now. That sentence, though never spoken aloud, becomes a quiet mantra, a promise to themselves. There are moments, still, when doubt knocks, when the mind whispers cruel things. You waited too long. You ruined it. They've moved on. And maybe those things are true, but for the first time those voices do not hold the final say. The soul, newly awakened, answers back. Even if the door remains closed, I will not live behind locked walls anymore. Even if I cannot return to their world, I will not exile myself from my own. They begin to remember the details with a gentler lens, not with longing, but with appreciation, the way you tilted your head when listening, the quiet strength in your words, the kindness that didn't need explanation. They realize you were never asking for perfection, only presence, only honesty. They think of all the times you waited for them to catch up emotionally, the patience you carried in your eyes, even when you didn't understand their silence. And they know now. They could have trusted you. You weren't a trap. You were a refuge. But they weren't ready to be safe. They don't know what the future holds. They don't know if you'll respond, but they begin to understand that reconnection doesn't always mean reunion. Sometimes it means returning to the parts of ourselves that we buried out of fear. Sometimes it means saying, I see you. I see who I was, and I choose to grow anyway. That, too, is a kind of reconciliation. That, too, is healing. And in that healing, they begin to change. Their words become softer but clearer. Their presence becomes warmer but more grounded. They no longer need to be everything to everyone. They no longer need to pretend they are unaffected. Instead, they start telling the truth in small ways, to themselves, to others. They begin to show up not with performance but with presence. They begin to call people back when they say they will. They begin to look into eyes instead of looking away. They begin to let themselves be held, not just physically but emotionally. They think of you often during this time, not with the ache of desperation, but with the light of gratitude. You were the spark, the mirror, the moment that revealed how deeply they were hiding. And now with each breath, they try to live in a way that honors what you offered them. They stop measuring their worth by your response. They start measuring it by their own integrity. Did I speak honestly? Did I act with love? Did I try even when I was afraid? And maybe, one day, they imagine crossing paths with you again, not in some dramatic reunion, but in the quiet of an ordinary day. A bookstore, a sidewalk, a place neither of you expected, and maybe, in that moment, your eyes meet, and you see not the person who left, but the one who returned to themselves. And maybe there is a smile, maybe there is a conversation, or maybe, just maybe, there is peace. They don't need to be everything to you now. They don't need to be your future, but they hope to be remembered not just for their retreat, but for their return. Not just for the silence, but for the effort. They hope, in some way, their growth becomes a testament that people can change, not perfectly, but truly. That love, once awakened, does not die. It transforms, it deepens. It becomes something quieter but stronger, like roots beneath the soil, unseen, but holding everything steady. They begin to share their story, not with everyone, not loudly, but with those who listen, with those who are learning too. They talk about fear, about silence, about the beauty of reconnection, not just with people, but with truth. And in these conversations they find belonging. They find they are not alone. That others too have pushed away what they wanted most. That others too are learning to come home to themselves. And in the stillness of night, when the world is soft and sleep has not yet come, they place a hand over their heart and whisper thanks. Not just for you, but for the journey you ignited, for the way your presence changed the trajectory of their life, for the way your kindness lingered longer than you knew. They don't know if you'll ever know what you meant, but they will carry that meaning with reverence. Always. If you are reading this now, if you have found their words somehow, know that they wrote them not to win you back, but to give something back, their truth, their care, their transformation. They do not seek to rewrite history. They only seek to honor it, to say, "You mattered. You mattered more than I let myself admit, and I am better because you were here." And if you have moved on, they hope it is with joy. If your heart is full elsewhere, they hope it is with someone who sees you clearly, who listens as deeply as you once listened to them, who treasures the parts of you that they once knew only in passing. They hope your days are light and your nights are peaceful, and that you never again have to wonder if your presence left a mark. It did, more than you will ever know. And if the door remains open, even just a crack, they will step through, slowly, without demands, without pretense, with hands open, not to take but to offer, a conversation, a coffee, a walk, a moment. And if that is all that comes of it, it will be enough. Because this time, they are not here to fix the past. They are here to honor it, to thank it, to build something new from its lessons. They will not pretend they are healed completely. No one is. But they are healing. They are choosing daily to be brave, to reach out when it feels hard, to say what is true even when it shakes, to stand still in love rather than run from it. And that, they've learned, is what connection is made of. Not perfection, but presence. Not control, but surrender. So here they are, with a heart that has known fear and finally chose love anyway, with a soul that was once closed and has now cracked open, letting the light seep in. They do not promise forever. They do not offer flawless love, but they offer realness. They offer effort. They offer truth. And maybe that's enough to begin again. They begin to understand now that love is not always a thunderclap. Sometimes it's the steady rhythm of someone choosing you in quiet ways, again and again. And they see how often they mistook that quiet for uncertainty, when really it was steadiness. It wasn't the lack of passion that scared them. It was the lack of chaos. They had grown so accustomed to fire that warmth felt foreign, and now they grieve, not only the space that grew between you, but the tenderness they didn't know how to accept when it was offered so freely. There's a particular moment they recall often, one they once buried beneath pride. You reached for them and they flinched. You offered softness and they deflected it with sarcasm. At the time they told themselves you were just too much. But now they see what you were was sincere, what you were was open. And it was their fear that turned warmth into pressure, not anything you did wrong. They carry that truth carefully now, not as a burden, but as a guide, a reminder that when someone reaches with honesty, you meet them with presence, not with walls.